once a week, and they actually provided the texts for the class. Each person provided their own text that they were interested in, and then sort of taught it to the rest of us. So it was a really interesting experiment, and just lovely discussions and writing ensued. And I actually finished the book I was working on, so it solved my problem. And so we're just four of us. It was a larger class, but just four of us wanted to read tonight. And one of us doesn't want to read, but I'm making her. I'm making her go first. And are there any announcements? Next week is an Edge reading here at 7:30.
7:30.
And Julia actually will also be reading that. And is there anything else?
Curiosity Symposium.
Curiosity Symposium.
And as well as May 24th, on Tuesday, May 24th, is the Casa Libre fundraiser. It's dinner and dancing at La Cocina, which is located at Old Town Artisans. If you just come and eat and have a few drinks and dance with us, we will make Casa Libre money, because the venue is donating a percentage of the bar and the food receipts that night. So just come and have fun, and you'll be supporting us.
Great, thank you. Okay, so our first reader has pneumonia, but is here to read to us. Jennifer Gillespie, and I asked everybody to just write a line about their writing life. And she says, my life with writing is like a fairy, almost impossible to capture.
Right. So I'm sorry I haven't really had time to prepare, because this is the first day I've been without a fever. So, okay. The name of my piece is called The Dragon Lady, which is just a work in progress. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, can you just adjust the mic a little bit?
There you go.
Great.
Daisy's always hated her name, as she imagined what her life would be like if she had a more sensible name. After years of playing Final Fantasy in her parents' basement, she decided this better name would be Finn. Neither name suited her thin, frail frame, but the name Daisy belonged to some deep, golden tan, blonde hair, voluptuous bimbo you would find on a Baywatch rerun. She was more of the thick glasses, ghost white skin, paper thin, with warm type. At age 15, she moved into her parents' basement, and at age 25, she was still residing in the family basement. Her parents didn't really know what she did all day, but they were pleased to receive a check for rent and other expenses slipped into the door every month. Sin, as she insisted everyone called her, was a computer programmer which suited her antisocial tendencies. She tried remote consulting at one point, but kept getting fired after repeatedly telling her clients they were idiots. Her only option was to write stupid little apps for even stupider people. And that's just, I guess you'd call that chapter 1, a very short chapter 1. And the next one is on death. Sin knocked on the tree, expecting an answer, but there was none. There was no magic left in the world. It was like believing in eternal salvation, Santa, or any other magical being. Nothing was coming to rescue her, but here she was, staring up at the great tree in her parents' backyard, expecting what she did not know. She wanted to climb into the small crack at the base of the tree like she did when she was a little girl, but she was no longer a little girl. Her parents were dead, and well, life was knocking on her door. She wanted to hide in that tree that no longer seemed so great. Everything in life seemed so daunting, but the prospect of moving was the worst of all. She was never close to her parents, but they never seemed in a rush to get her out either. It seemed so cold of her brothers and sisters to tug so hard at her parents' meager possessions, as if they had the crown jewels and the endless discussions of the housing market, as if they were going to make a killing from the sale of their unexceptional home. And that was the second very short chapter. The next one is called The Will. Sin was a nail biter, and tonight was prime time nail biting season. The reading of the will by a thin man with a large nose and a large head reminded her of that head-fold commercial where their head turns into a huge head balloon on a tiny body. She imagined if she stuck a pin in his head, it would inflate to normal size and match the rest of the small body. Sin was the youngest of 5, 2 brothers, 2 sisters, and then 15 years later, oops, she came along. Being the youngest and most hated child among her siblings, she always had a paranoia about people sitting behind her. She developed a habit of constantly checking the room and looking behind her, much to the annoyance of her so-called friends, parents, and teachers. Scanning the room, she found her sister Francine glowering at her. Francine, or Fanny as Sim liked to call her just to annoy her, still resented Sim for a loss of sleep, poopy diapers, and forced babysitting duties. Sim suddenly dropped her eyes, nervously looked at her phone. Not knowing what else to do, she decided to check her email. She hadn't checked her email since the loss of her parents, and the support folder was starting to pile up with loads of unread email. She looked up with that paranoid feeling of being watched and found that everybody was turned towards her, looking at her. Clearing her throat, she said, "Yes." "Mr. Tinsley just finished reading the will," snapped her sister Francine. "You weren't listening as usual," she said, rolling her eyes. "I don't know why, but Mom and Dad left you everything. The letter said something along the lines that you had been paying rent since you were 15 and the rest of us never contributed to anything. Why would you do that anyway? Anyway, the letter basically said if we wanted anything, we should take it up with you." Wow, really?" Sin asked. She was amazed. Why would her parents leave her everything? She hadn't really talked to them since she moved down to the basement. "You don't have any kids. I really don't. I really had my hopes set on Mom's China set, which has been passed down through the family for ages," said another of her sisters, Sybil. "Sybil, I have a right to the China just as much as you do. Just because you're the oldest daughter doesn't mean you get it," said Francine. Clearing his throat, Paul said, "Well, evidently birth order didn't matter to Mom and Dad, since everything is being left to Daisy, the bad vasectomy baby." "If I could have a word, please, with Miss Bowman," said Mr. Tinsley. When nobody moved, he added, "Alone." Let me stop right there.
Very brave to not want to read and have a favorite book. So our next reader is going to be Sharon Erickson, who says, "I have a constant running monologue in my head that I can't seem to turn off. So I thought maybe I should start writing to see if putting it down on paper will give me some occasional peace and quiet." Sharon.
Kind of shorter. Is that okay?
This is great.
Great. I renamed my piece for Julia because she was adamantly detested my original title. So I called it, at least my working title is, Have Remington Will Travel. Chapter 1, Grace. I was tired, cold, hungry, and more than a little depressed. It wasn't just that it was raining, or that I'd had a long, boring, and frustrating day, or that I'd left my raincoat at the office and was now sitting in a rumpled heap of wet wool that was formerly my best suit, or that I could feel water pooled in the toe of my black leather pump, or that Andrew was dead, though none of those things were helping, especially the part where Andrew was dead. Andrew. I loved Andrew. He was my mirror, my mentor, my friend, my biggest critic, and my most ardent fan. A kindly, caring professor of English who owned and operated a bookstore downtown with his sister Grace and taught part-time at the university. I loved Andrew. He was the single most important person in my life, and I hadn't seen him in years. Now I was waiting in my car outside the bookstore, Andrew's bookstore, for his sister Grace to arrive. She had called that morning to let me know that Andrew had left me something in his will, and could I meet her at the store this evening to pick it up. Of course, she had said. I could see about mailing it, dear, though that might be prohibitively expensive. It's quite heavy. I can barely lift it myself. Or I could see about a delivery service if you're too busy, as I imagine you are. Or maybe we could find another time to get together, though I'm so busy just now with tying up the estate, closing the store, arranging for the sale of the remaining stock, sorting through Andrew's personal things, and seeing to his little bequests. Nothing terribly valuable, as I'm sure you must know, so it may not even be worth your time. Still, he specifically mentioned it in the will, so I can only assume it was important to him that you receive it. Whatever you want to do with it afterwards is your own affair, and after all, Andrew will never know, will he? You two hadn't really seen that much of each other these past few years, so it may hold very little interest for you. But I'm the executor of the estate, and it's my legal responsibility to see that all of the provisions. Grace was a master manipulator who could lay you to waste with your own guilt. I said I would come by whenever it was convenient for her. The agreed meeting time was 6:30, but I had gotten there early to avoid her stock lecture on good manners and the disrespectful rudeness of people who were always late. I guess my time's not as valuable as yours, she'd say with that steely, mirthless smile that she reserved for those who had earned her undying disapproval. I was a gold medalist. I turned the car off and sat back in the seat, glancing absently out the streaming windows of the familiar neighborhood. The store was housed in an unimpressive turn-of-the-century building that had once been a dry goods establishment. It was lost on a downtown side street, 3 stories of mortar-washed brick with steel casement windows and bronze Art Nouveau light fixtures on either side of the front door. These shed something only vaguely associated with light and didn't illuminate the entrance so much as give you a hint where to look for it. The door itself was constructed of a rough, dark wood, like the door of an old church, with iron fittings that felt cold and heavy and significant in your hands. An old canvas awning with the single word Camerons ran the length of the storefront and was currently dripping with water and flapping noisily against the building. It was about 6:45 when Grace pulled up behind me and got out of her car. If I was underdressed for the conditions, she was more than a match for the weather, swathed in assorted and ill-fitting rain gear that included a plastic bonnet, a relic from the 50s, tied under her chin, an oversized and shabby trench coat that was missing its belt, black Wellington boots with a pair of purple leg warmers spilling over the top, and an impossibly big umbrella clutched in her hand. She waved me to the front door of the shop, pulled a heavy ring of old-fashioned keys from her handbag, and unlocked it. Talking to herself under her breath, she headed for the office and light switches at the back of the store. I closed and locked the door behind me, running my hand lovingly over its worn surface, then turned and surveyed the shop. Grace had by this time switched on the office desk lamp and the wall sconces, and in the dim glow I could see the carved mahogany shelves with their familiar hand-printed labels. They were all empty, most of the stock boxed and standing on the floor ready for shipping. The chairs, tables, and desks were tagged and stacked in the corner, and the Arthur Rackham prints from the children's section were leaning against the wall next to the furniture. I walked to the iron spiral staircase and climbed up to the balcony. It too was empty now, but in the days when I worked at the store, it contained several deep leather armchairs, ornate 30s-era brass floor lamps with dusty silk shades, a small mission-style desk and chair tucked in the corner, a reading table with benches, and shelves of used and bargain books. I took my lunch and coffee breaks there, studied for classes there, and there I did my best writing. I moved to the balcony railing and stood looking out over the store, stripped and deconstructed, all the magic packed away in prosaic little parcels with neatly typed labels. Tears came suddenly and silently, rolling down my face and into the collar of my wet blouse. They came from a place I'd forgotten, a place I'd left behind and couldn't find again, no matter how desperately I searched. A place of wonder and enchantment where dreams are born and where, with enough neglect, they go to die. A place deep inside where I never traveled anymore. I had lost the way in. And Harrod, what are you doing out there? Grace was standing below, looking up at me. Didn't you hear me calling? Come on back to the office and out of this cold, dark, dusty place. I have the space heater on and I've made some hot tea. She continued talking as she led me back toward the office. I couldn't hear everything she said, but the theme was so familiar I didn't have any trouble filling in the blanks. Honestly, I don't think you've changed at all in the past 8 years. You're as feckless as ever. Grace loved trotting out words like feckless and making me feel like a third grader. The last thing I wanted to do tonight was chase you all over the store. Now sit down and have some tea. She poured 2 cups and handed one to me, then settled back in the office chair at the old partner's desk she had once shared with Andrew, and regarded me in silence over the rim of her cup for what seemed like a long time. You're wet, she said finally. That's it.